Five Nights at Freddy's 3 has a missing piece. In 2014, Five Nights at Freddy's quickly established itself as a classic in the genre of indie horror. This point-and-click survival game set in a dark pizzeria had the perfect atmosphere and engaging gameplay to captivate its audience, leading to a large and rapidly growing fan base. Due to this success, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 was highly anticipated, and releasing only 3 months after the first, it certainly delivered. FNaF 2 replicated everything that made the first game great and upped the ante by removing closable doors, adding animatronics, and substantially advancing the story. With these two games, indie game developer Scott Cawthon had finally found a style that worked. These early games developed a formula and created the standards for a Five Nights at Freddy's game to follow. Things would eventually change and evolve, but originally these games were predictable and reliable. With wandering animatronics and security monitors, these games were recognizable for their recurring themes, including nightly calls with the character Phone Guy. Phone Guy was one of Freddy Fazbear's earliest employees and someone who'd been with the company longer than any other character we've met, likely outlasting even the restaurant's founders. From around 1983 to 1993, Phone Guy was in charge of training or advising employees as well as updating them on policy changes and work-related news. Each night, he would leave the new night guards with a recorded message or phone call as a way of conveying necessary information. This would tell the player what to expect in the coming night, but also allow us to fill in the details of the game's mysterious story. But everything changed in FNaF 3. Compared to the previous games, Five Nights at Freddy's 3 was dramatically different, being the first game to take place outside of a restaurant and having no association with the original company. This is a significant change since the formula had previously relied heavily on its setting, but it's understandable why this change was made. Fazbear Entertainment no longer exists, and with no one willing to associate with the company, the only profitable decision would be to exploit the old restaurant for its murders. We experience another deviation from the formula in the cast of animatronics present each night. Since FNaF 3 takes place after 30 years of neglect and decay, Springtrap is the only somewhat preserved animatronic remaining, preserved in the same way you describe a piece of beef jerky. This was different for a Five Nights at Freddy's game, but it worked. Sure, we only get one real animatronic, but it makes sense given the story. And even though we aren't really in a restaurant, the building is modeled after the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, so visually it's just like the previous games. In a lot of ways, these changes were completely reasonable. Initially, FNaF was known for its restaurant setting, but after 4 of their restaurants ended in tragedies, would Fazbear Entertainment really consider opening again? No, not for another few months. The point is, most of FNaF 3's nuances are fine. Plus, with a series as story-driven as Five Nights at Freddy's, the simple restaurant set, sit, and survive style wouldn't allow the series to grow. At the time, FNaF 3 deviated from the rest of the series by taking place outside of a restaurant setting, but now it marks the loss of dependency on these old themes. We didn't know it at the time, but FNaF 2 would soon become the last game to take place inside of a restaurant, at least for a while. This was also incredibly artistic from a storytelling standpoint. Now that some time has passed, I think more fans would be receptive to another classic FNaF style game set in the original pizzeria, but at the time, using old cassette tapes was a creative way to tell its story without making another prequel. As a sequel, FNaF 3 was able to further the story linearly without relying on the past as much as both of the previous games had. This quality was used exceptionally effectively. FNaF 3 brought us the earliest source of information in the timeline and created the basis for modern FNaF by introducing Springtrap, making it both the earliest and latest event in the timeline at the point of its release. But there's one change that never made sense. A pattern broken in one of the most important commonalities in all of these games. A break that cannot be mended without a piece missing or solved without uncertainty, and it's in the first voice line of the game.
Hello? Hello? I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night. Hello? Hello? Hello and welcome to your new summer job at the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Hey, glad you came back for another night.
For some reason, FNaF 3 doesn't start on our first night, it begins sometime after, meaning that we not only missed an entire phone call, but specifically the introduction to our job. This was a pretty significant change from what we'd become accustomed to. In both of the previous games, Phone Guy calls us on night 1 to welcome us to our job and to give us all the information we need to start out. But in FNaF 3, we don't get that. Phone Dude makes it clear that this is not our first night, and while he does give us a basic job description, it seems like a promotion, leaving our original job description unknown. To be fair, Phone Dude greets us by promising that it will be more interesting this time, so we can assume that nothing really happened on the first night. But missing our real night 1 means we're missing context from the start of the game. Each of FNaF 1's phone calls gave us a new mechanic to focus on or an explanation for what was going on around us, while FNaF 3 only has one vague and frankly irrelevant phone call before being permanently replaced by 40-year-old cassettes. That's the problem with having a sequel that tells the story of a prequel. FNaF 3 is trying to explain the distant past while existing in the present, but there isn't room to do both. Now, Now, FNAF 3 features an opening newspaper like the previous games, but it's not a help wanted ad like we're used to because when the game begins, we already have the job. Instead, it's a coming soon ad teasing the upcoming horror attraction and the actual relics it will feature. Similarly, night 1 starts and we're greeted with "thanks for coming back" and entered into a conversation that's clearly a continuation of a previous one that we have no history of. Of course, our protagonist does, but we just got here. This creates a disconnect between the protagonist and the player since he seems to know more than us. It's like reverse dramatic irony, where the audience would typically know something that the characters do not. This change also makes it nearly impossible to determine when our first night takes place in relation to our protagonist's first night. In the first call, Phone Dude says, "Glad you came back for another night. I promise it'll be a lot more interesting this time," which sounds like there may have been a gap between what I'll call night 0 and the first night we experience in the game. Of course, it is possible that Phone Dude is simply showing his appreciation for having a reliable employee, but his "glad you came back" paired with "it'll be a lot more interesting this time" could indicate that our protagonist was let go and only recently agreed to come back. Or, as indicated by Phone Dude's line, "We found some great new relics over the weekend, it was the weekend." Now, should we trust Phone Dude's wording here? After all, the dates in these games have always been a point of contention, with our phone operator saying one thing and our paychecks showing another. Luckily, there is another clue we can use to identify the true nature of this gap. One important consistency throughout these games can help us understand the missing bits of our story: game titles. At this point, every game in the series had the same name, Five Nights at Freddy's. Even though this is the name of the series, it would be a pretty unfitting name for a game that doesn't feature Freddy Fazbear or Freddy Fazbear's Restaurant. It does, however, create a bit of irony since the game is set in an incredibly realistic recreation of an old Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but it's not technically Freddy's. Beyond the surface, however, this title has significant relevance to our timeline. As the names imply, all 3 games have 5 main nights, simulating a 5-day work week. Since this is true in FNAF 3, we can conclude that the game takes place from Monday to Friday, with the 6th night presumably being Saturday. Aside from being chronologically backed, this idea is also supported by Phone Dude mentioning that the attraction opens in like a week on night 1, which would be Monday. So if the attraction was set to open exactly a week from then, our protagonist would have had to burn it down that weekend to stop it from opening on the following Monday, which he does. So yeah, why is this important? This tells us that the gap I theorized about was in fact the weekend. That's why Phone Dude welcomes us back and promises that the attraction will be more interesting this time. The company added a bunch of new relics over the weekend. Now, this in and of itself isn't groundbreaking, however, it does serve as a piece to a larger puzzle piece. Given that our protagonist is returning on night 1, and we know this is a Monday, unless his first day was the previous Friday, we could be missing an entire week of events. This is problematic. As the player, we are the protagonist. We see from his perspective and control his actions. We rely on our protagonist to provide our point of view, as his actions are directly influenced by what we see and understand. But in FNAF 3, our story starts somewhere in the middle of his. This is troubling for us as an audience since we expect to see the story from start to finish, and here, our character has already experienced half of the story without us. It's like we showed up late to a movie, but this time there's no one to ask what we missed. It's just lost. There's no prologue or preface or really any explanation of what happened in this missing week. Another cause of our confusion regarding FNAF 3's timeline is the lack of paychecks. Without these, we can't be sure when the game takes place, or arguably more importantly, who our character is. At the time of FNAF 3's release, it was the only game in the series to not explicitly tell us who we were playing as, which would become more common from here on out. Both of the previous games made it explicitly clear who we were playing as, giving us the first and last names of every player character via their paychecks. In FNAF 1, we know without a shadow of a doubt that we play as Mike Smith, just as in FNAF 2, we can be certain that our protagonists are Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith. But in FNAF 3, the closest we get to our protagonist's name comes from Phone Dude, who addresses the player as Dude and Man. So as far as a canon name for our FNAF 3 protagonist, we might as well give up here. But these names have never been accurate anyways. By now, most fans and theorists have adopted the popular headcanon that the names given to us in FNAF 1 and 2 are actually aliases, in other words, made-up names. This is believed to be how Michael Afton tricked Fazbear Entertainment into hiring him on several different occasions. Despite being the son of their disgraced co-founder and serial murderer William Afton, he used pseudonyms that were unfamiliar to the company. Similarly, many people believe that Michael is the player in FNAF 3, crediting him as the overarching protagonist of the series. This has a lot of support narratively. With a story as extensive as FNAF, it makes sense that the same person who's caught tampering with animatronics in the 87 location goes on to do the same thing in the pizzeria from FNAF 1, even returning 30 years later to make sure the deed is done. See, sometime after William's crimes began, Michael became obsessed with undoing his father's actions as a way to purge his father's sins and have his own forgiven. That's why he goes to the 87 location. It was the first first restaurant to open since the MCI, and the local news was reporting strange behavior. Hearing that the animatronics were acting out of character, Michael had to look closer. Upon his examination, he found that the animatronics were haunted and possessed by the spirits of William's victims. Although this doesn't really matter until FNaF 3. You see, in 1987, Michael was most likely pretty naive to the real ramifications of his father's actions. For some reason, whether it be from his time at Circus Babies or due to the recent news, he applies to Freddy's using a fake name and begins quietly investigating the building, discovering that the mascots are possessed. But the company had already planned to scrap the animatronics due to unrelated malfunctions. Michael may have tampered with their programming since we're able to choose the AI level of the characters in Night 7, his first night. But even if this is the case, it wouldn't affect the fate of the animatronics since they were already going to be scrapped before Michael got involved. It is possible that Michael had another plan that was foiled by the company's decision to scrap the animatronics, which could explain his actions in FNaF 3. But again, Michael most likely didn't know that they were possessed until Night 7, giving him no time to formulate a plan to save them. Based on Phone Guy's wording on Night 5, Michael was likely motivated by the announcement of the animatronics being scrapped, since the company didn't have a replacement for Jeremy until the newspaper revealing this fact was published. So Michael could have tampered with the animatronics as a last-ditch effort to disrupt them, since it sounds like William was fidgeting with their programming as well. Less than a decade later, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opens in a new location, and Michael is more diligent this time, superseding the renowned Phone Guy, Michael using the unsuspecting name of Mike Smith. Just to be clear, his fake name uses his real first name? Is this like a hiding in plain sight kind of thing? Limits possible contingencies by being the only guard to work at the restaurant, aside from the aforementioned Phone Guy. So, Michael succeeds this time? No. No. This time, Michael carries out essentially the same plan and is fired once again for the same reasons. Good thing we hear from Phone Guy, not Video Chat Guy, or else this series would have been a lot shorter. Anyways, the main difference here is that the animatronics are not acting strange during the day, only at night in the presence of night guards. Since we know Michael's tampering is not in response to the animatronics programming this time, even though that's what Phone Dude implies, what is he doing? He may have been trying to figure out how the suits are possessed or even trying to free the spirits, but as far as we know, he was unsuccessful in his attempts. Based on the most common interpretation of Follow Me, William Afton was later responsible for dismantling these animatronics, but he did so in a way that did not free them. Again, whatever Michael had set out to do, he had failed. It isn't until 30 years later that Michael would finally get really close to succeeding. In FNaF 3, Michael would spend more than a week working at Fazbear's Fright, a new horror attraction based on the unsolved mysteries of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Here we see that the toy animatronics were recovered, along with a foxy head and several other props from previous restaurants. This leaves me wondering, did Michael know that the toys were still out there? I only ask this because after the events of FNaF 2, the toys were supposedly scrapped while the other animatronics were sent to storage. So did Michael consider the toys dealt with, or was he waiting for his next opportunity to find them? At this point in the story, Michael may have also been looking for his father, which would explain why he is still following the animatronics 30 years later. The opening newspaper also mentions that this Freddy's themed attraction features actual relics from the decades-old pizzeria, which could have intrigued Michael, who wouldn't know exactly what they found or who it brought back. Here, Michael notices that everything is calm. He may not know it, but the original animatronics no longer exist, and how Phone Dude's crew didn't find their empty suits rotting in the old pizzeria is beyond me. Anyways, they track down even more obscure items, like training cassettes from the original restaurant and a rotting corpse. While they've certainly captured the essence of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, knowing that Michael spent up to a week at the attraction before Springtrap showed up, he most likely didn't experience any strange activity. We could debate if the Easter eggs are lore relevant, since there are moving objects such as posters and other entities that were probably present before Springtrap's arrival, but for the most part, everything was normal before Springtrap was brought in. Anyway, what made Michael stay? Neglecting the Easter eggs, Michael should have spent anywhere from 2 to 8 uneventful nights at the attraction, with nothing strange ever happening. Phone Dude does acknowledge that we'll start seeing crazy stuff if the ventilation goes offline, but I wouldn't consider this relevant. You could argue that the hallucinations are in part caused by the presence of haunted relics, but Phone Dude specifically connects the delusions to ventilation, or lack thereof, which is a real effect of oxygen deprivation and elevated carbon dioxide levels. He also tells us that in trying to make the place look vintage, they fitted the building with barely functional equipment, which you can imagine wouldn't meet the standards that the building was built for. As I mentioned earlier, we don't know exactly what Michael's job was before Night 1, but he shouldn't have had a problem keeping the ventilation system online before Night 2, since there was nothing to disrupt him yet. This means that Michael shouldn't have experienced any hallucinations prior to Springtrap's arrival. So what made Michael stay, considering that he didn't witness anything unusual for several nights? We We know that in his previous investigations, he'd have to thwart vicious animatronics on his very first nights, but here, there's no sign of anything strange until his second week. It could be Michael's concern regarding the newspaper's claims that drive him, as the article boasts about featuring actual relics from the decades-old pizzeria. While we don't get to see Michael's first week on the job, Phone Dude could have revealed that they're continuing to track down old relics, which would certainly pique Michael's interest and cause him to stick around to see what they might uncover. This is also the first mention of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 30 years, and Michael could be searching for his father at this point given his proclamation at the end of Sister Location. Michael knows that historically, William has always been tied to Freddy's, whether it be as an owner or a perpetrator, or in this case, as a decoration. Either way, Michael was waiting for something, for the company to uncover possessed relics or for his father to show up, and unfortunately, he got both. To finally destroy his father's vile legacy, Michael burns down Fazbear's Fright before it can open to the public. So all of our evidence supports the idea that Michael is our protagonist. However, there is another theory. In the Fazbear Fright story, what we found, we're introduced to a character named Hudson, a 23-year-old security guard at the upcoming horror attraction Fazbear's Fright. Can we please get more creative with our names? Now, not all of the details in the story align with what we see in the game, but there are some important overlaps. For one, Hudson is present on the night Springtrap is brought in, just like our protagonist in FNaF 3. Keep in mind, each source only has one person working that night. Hudson also suffers from vivid hallucinations of the animatronics attacking him. This is tied to Hudson's irrational fear of the animatronics, a fear that the other workers do not share. Michael would have reason to hallucinate the animatronics attacking him. He actually experienced it on 3 separate occasions. Hudson, however, appears to be channeling his abusive childhood in his hallucinations, hearing the voice of his stepdad echoing around the attraction. The hallucinations themselves are also important. The game's phantom animatronics are described as suspiciously burned in FNAF's official guidebook, while the hallucinations in what we found look just like the real props in the attraction, bloodied with red paint and deteriorating. But there are plenty of details that draw contrast between the two sources. For example, the story makes a point of stating that there isn't a phone in the building yet. It was to be installed the day after Springtrap arrived. Along with this, Hudson has several co-workers, his high school friends Barry and Dwayne, Faith, an interning art student, and Virgil, another security guard. 4 more characters than we see in FNAF 3. All of these characters are Hudson's age, 23, aside from Virgil, who's much older, but none of these characters resemble FNAF 3's Phone Dude. Then there's Springtrap. While the Springtrap suit does exist in what we found, and Hudson does find a decomposing body inside, most of what he sees is hallucinated. I'm not ruling out the fact that William Afton is in the suit, but he definitely never came alive in the story. Also, while the game ties the hallucinations to a faulty ventilation system, ventilation is never brought up as an explanation in the book. Whether or not this is relevant to the story of what we found, it does make me question whether the ventilation excuse is story related or simply part of the game's tutorial. So despite what we found giving us a name, I find Michael Afton to be the more likely protagonist of FNAF 3. In a lot of ways, Five Nights at Freddy's 3 was the first game to break the mold, and in doing so opened the door for the changes that shaped the series we have today. FNAF 1 and 2 were great, but the stories of Five Nights at Freddy's expands beyond the restaurants, with William's secret projects, Circus Baby schemes, Orange Guy's midnight motoring, and much more. With FNAF's missing pieces comes room for theorizing and forces us to look at the story in a way we never would have if everything was all laid out for us. I hope you found this video interesting. Anyways, thanks for watching.